So, hello everyone, I am Michele Farisco, and I'm from the Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics, Uppsala University. Today, together with my colleague, Arleen Salles, we will present you some ethical reflections about artificial intelligence. So, specifically, this module of the CDC courses capacity development courses is about the relationship between neuroethics and AI ethics. So we will first introduce AI ethics and relevant regulation, and then specifically Arleen will explain you about the connection between neuroethics and AI ethics, and I will then present kind of case study, which is the brain-inspired AI, and then we will have time for discussion. So the premise of our discourse today is that AI, artificial intelligence, is increasingly spreading into our society. So we have an increasing impact of artificial intelligence in a number of contexts for different activities at different levels. This raises the need of an ethical reflection, because when technology touches upon different social contexts, then the need for a reflection about the possible ethical dimensions arises. So there is actually an increasing need of this kind of reflection. So, as I just summarized today, we will start from a very short introduction about AI ethics. Then we will specifically reflect upon the connection between neuroethics and AI ethics. Then we will reflect upon the case study of brain-inspired AI. And finally, we will have a discussion. So first, AI ethics. What is AI ethics? AI ethics can be mainly distinguished into trends, so to say. The first is the academic discussion around the ethical issues raised by AI. And we can say that AI ethics is, from this point of view, a discipline, an academic discipline. So it has kind of methodology, and we have also different, not properly speaking traditions, but different schools, let's say, of AI ethics. Then we have another more practically oriented trend, which is the combination of practical guidelines and recommendations. So this is basically the AI regulation, which is growing and growing nowadays. As an example of this second trend, we can refer to a number of documents. We already have several documents. I just selected 3 of them just to give you an idea. Then we can discuss whether you already know these documents or if you also read these documents. The first I thought to refer to is this communication from the Commission to the European Parliament, the Council, the European Economic and Social Committee, and the Committee of the Regions. And the title of this document is highly indicative, and the title is Building Trust in Human-Centric Artificial Intelligence. We already have in these documents two terms, 2 concepts that play an important role in present discussion about AI ethics. The terms are trust, and we will see this term also in another document. And the second is human-centric. So this is indicative of a trend in contemporary discussion, which revolves around trustworthy AI, so when we can trust AI. And the other is to build an AI which places the human at the center as a core. We might say the human dignity and the defense of human dignity as a core principle. So this was just the first document to give you an example of how AI regulation is today conceived and developed. The second document I thought to refer to is this from the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. This is an independent group which has been appointed by the European Commission specifically to reflect upon the ethical issues raised by AI. And this group has been pretty active, and it has produced a number of documents. One of these documents is these ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. Again, we have here the reference to trust and specifically trustworthy AI. We will see later that this concept applied to AI is not unproblematic, and so it will deserve a more specific terminological, so to say, analysis. Then another document I think is illustrative of contemporary AI regulation is this Montreal Declaration for a Responsible Development of Artificial Intelligence. Here we have another concept which plays an important role in contemporary discussion about AI, which is responsibility. The title here refers to responsible development of artificial intelligence. So responsibility is put as a core principle for an ethically sound and reliable artificial intelligence. Okay, so I just selected 3 documents from, again, the very rich contemporary regulation of AI to give you an idea of what they talk about. So if we enlarge the scope to the AI regulation in general, we can see there are some commonalities, some common points among the different documents. First, they aim to achieve an ethically sound design, development, and application of AI. So this is kind of shared general goal to have ethically reliable design, development, and application. So the 3 phases of AI are all considered in need for an ethical regulation. Then these documents all address potential limitations of human beings vis-a-vis AI. More specifically, they focus on the limited knowledge of human subject, the limited decision-making capacity of the human subject, and the limited power to control by the human subject, to control, of course, the AI systems. So they seem all to refer to these 3 main limitations of the human subject compared to AI. And finally, all these documents follow traditional practical ethics theorizing and methodology. For instance, in the form of medical ethics codes. So basically, AI regulation is inspired by practical ethics, and they very often take the medical ethics codes as a reference standard, and we will see more specifically what I mean by this. So in general, AI regulation presents what can be defined a top-down approach. So they combine classical fundamental principles, basically human-centered values like human dignity or respect for autonomy or non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, and fairness. The one of you which are a bit familiar with medical ethics or bioethics can recognize that these principles are the classical principle of bioethics, for instance. So AI regulation combine these classical fundamental principles with more specific principles that are more tailored to AI, like accountability, effectiveness, trust, transparency, explicability, and others. So This is, in general, the approach that contemporary AI regulation uses. A number of criticisms have been raised regarding this general approach. First, this approach risks to be too abstract. So we have a too high level of abstraction. Secondly, there is an important difficulty in translating this approach in action-oriented recommendations. So the problem with this kind of approach is that it raises the main risk of not being sufficiently effective in, we might say, pushing people to act accordingly. And in reaction to these two main criticisms, we can have three kinds of strategies. The first is to focus on how actual organizations understand and address the ethical issues raised by artificial intelligence. So a focus on what people involved in AI development actually understand the ethical issues. This is exemplified, for instance, by this paper by Salles and Arleen, which is titled Organizational Responses to the Ethical Issues of Artificial Intelligence. A second strategy in reactions to the criticism raised to actual AI regulation is to develop frameworks for actionability of the guidelines. So defining the criteria for putting the actual regulation into practice. And this is exemplified by this article by Sticks, Actionable Principle for Artificial Intelligence Policy, 3 Pathways. The third possible reaction is to extend the meaning of AI ethics beyond practical ethics. And we will specifically focus on this third strategy, which we, together with Arleen and another colleague, we have recently introduced in this paper on the contribution of neuroethics to the ethics and regulation of artificial intelligence. Actually, in this paper, we specifically focused on the connection between neuroethics and AI ethics, while the need for an expansion of the meaning of AI ethics is a concept that we are working on since at least 2, if not 3 years. So, before more specifically focusing on this third possible strategy, I think it's important to also consider some more institutional definition of AI ethics. For instance, in the document I referred to before by the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, AI ethics is defined as a subfield of applied ethics. So you see, we have this explicit reference to a practical understanding of AI ethics. And so a subfield of applied ethics focusing on the ethical issues raised by the development, deployment, and use of AI. So according to this definition, there are calls, for instance, by IEEE, to integrate applied ethics into education and research to address the issues of autonomous and intelligent systems. So you see that AI ethics is defined in terms of applied ethics. And we have some core principles as integral part of this AI ethics, so conceived. So trustworthy AI has 3 main components. It should be lawful, which means that AI should be complying with all applicable laws and regulations. It should be ethical, so it should ensure adherence to ethical principles and values, and it should be robust, both from a technical but also social perspective. And we have 3 main content-oriented streams of AI ethics. The first possible focus is about the application of AI, for instance, machine learning, The second focus is about social and political issues arising in the digital society. And the third possible focus of AI ethics is about the metaphysical questions concerning the nature of reality and humanity. So we can have three main areas of reflection of AI ethics. Actually, contemporary regulation, so contemporary AI guidelines, rely heavily on an applied ethics methodology, as I already said, and they focus specifically on the first two areas that I just introduced, while the third, the metaphysical implication, is generally not considered. But in this way, the analysis risks to be incomplete because we think that the specific assessment of the ethical issues arise from AI cannot abstract away from the conceptual, including the metaphysical assumptions about relevant terms. In other words, it is necessary to clarify the meaning of the terms we refer to in our ethical analysis, otherwise our reflection is incomplete. So a preliminary conceptual clarification of terms is absolutely necessary. While these documents in general tend to take the meaning of notions such as intelligence, autonomy, consciousness, trustworthiness, purposiveness for granted, so they do not include a specific terminological clarification of these notions. And this is a risk because we think in this way the analysis again is incomplete. So it might be true that some recommendations could be valid regardless of how some notions are understood, but we think that if we do not more specifically reflect about the meaning of these notions, the applicability and the effectiveness of these guidelines will eventually remain limited. With this, I just introduce the next topic of this course, which is the need for a more conceptually solid AI ethics. And in order to reflect upon this point, we think it is useful to start from the connection between neuroethics and AI ethics. So now, Arleen, the floor is yours.
Yes. So, hello, everybody. Michele has given then a brief introduction to AI ethics and some of the problems raised by even the ethics of AI, some of the issues that arise, such as the lack of conceptual clarity and so on. So what I'm going to be doing next, briefly, of course, because this is a topic that probably deserves more than a few minutes, but in any case, we don't have enough time. I'm going to be addressing some calls that have been made lately for collaboration between neuroethics and AI ethics. So we do have two disciplines that appear to be pretty different and that definitely have a different origin, because neuroethics and AI ethics, even if they have things in common, they, we could say, are the response to different ethical issues. And yet there has been some calls for collaboration. So let's start then, since Michele has already provided an introduction to AI ethics, let's briefly talk about neuroethics. Now, neuroethics is specifically a response to advances in neuroscience that can and actually have changed some of the fundamental notions that human beings have. And actually advances in neuroscience have also impacted our value system at the individual level, that is what people think in themselves, but also at the communal level regarding how societies understand themselves. So it seems that advances in neuroscience, and particularly resulting neurotechnologies, have really made a dent into some of the things human beings believe about themselves, about who they are, about society, and so on. So neuroethics, a response to this, addresses scientific, philosophical, ethical, legal, and social issues, questions raised by neuroscience and related emerging neurotechnologies. And significantly, Neuroethics is both multi and interdisciplinary. Multi because it is fed by a number of disciplines. So we have within neuroethics, you find not only people in the social sciences and of course in neuroscience and in law and in the humanities. So we can say that there are a number of disciplines that play an important role in neuroethics, but at the same time, it is interdisciplinary because we cannot say that neuroethics is just philosophy or that neuroethics is just social science or that neuroethics is just neuroscience. Neuroethics is a discipline that results from the interaction of these different fields. So actually, I included a few of the articles where these distinctions and these main traits can be are addressed. So let's go to next. Now, sometimes one can say, well, let's go further. What is neuroethics? And probably rather than saying what is neuroethics, it is kind of interesting to focus on what neuroethicists do. So what do neuroethicists do? Well, they use ethical theory and reasoning to address a wide range of issues related to neuroscience. As Michele explained before, it is a common approach to go to, in philosophy, particularly the area of philosophy known as moral philosophy or ethics, millennia of studies and research have resulted in the development of a number of approaches, ethical theories, most to reflect on a number of issues. So we could say that one of the things that neuroethics does is take as a starting point those ethical theories, those principles, as Michele showed before, and in this case, apply them to the issues raised by neuroscience. So this is something neuroethicists do. But this is not the only thing they do. They focus on relevant neuroscientific findings to inform practical and theoretical issues. What is the meaning of this? Some neuroethicists have really put a lot of emphasis on how some neuroscientific findings can explain, for example, what morality is. What does it mean to make a moral decision? Who can be a moral agent? Who can make moral decisions and so on? So in any case, we have neuroethicists or some neuroethicists then focusing not just on applied ethics, not just on using principles to solve problems, but rather they focus on those things that neuroscience is telling us in order to understand what morality is. And finally, and this is what Michele was talking about before, there are some neuroethicists that focus on the analysis of concepts such as privacy, personal identity, humanness, trust, autonomy, and they examine critically assumptions on scientific interpretations. What does it mean? It means that rather than taking certain interpretations for granted, many neuroethicists are saying, even before we undertake, even before we, let's say, discuss whether DBS is right or wrong, we need to understand some of the main notions underlying DBS, deep brain stimulation. So if we're going to say that deep brain stimulation is wrong because it alters human identity, shouldn't we first know what human identity is? So that's what it means to say that we focus on conceptual issues. There are concepts that play an important role in any normative discussion, in any discussion of what is right, what is wrong, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. There are some concepts that are playing a very important role. And what neuroethicists are saying is, before we even address those practical issues, should we do this? Should we do that? We need to understand what we're talking about. So that is what conceptual analysis does. So we can move on to the next. So the interesting thing, though, is that, again, we have two disciplines, and yet lately there have been a number of articles, and we can say that, again, as Michele explained before, even ourselves, our team in Uppsala, have called for some type of interaction. We have been calling for some kind of collaboration between neuroethics and AI ethics. So we have calls for collaboration, fine. But if there are calls for collaboration, then the next question is why? Why would neuroethics and AI ethics interact and collaborate? Why is this good? Why is this desirable? Why is it recommended? And if it is recommended, in which areas should they collaborate? Should they collaborate in everything? Or are there specific areas where it would seem that they could help each other? So that's the issue that we're going to be addressing. But really, before doing this, let's go to the next. Yes. Why is collaboration desirable, first of all? Well, it could be argued, and actually has been argued by those who call for collaboration, including ourselves, that one of the reasons why collaboration is desirable and it is to be recommended is because, in fact, even though AI ethics and neuroethics, as I said, are a response to different problems, there are a lot of things in common. There are some commonalities. For example, as you probably know, AI technology plays an important role in several brain-related areas. Certainly, it plays an important role in some healthcare contexts. So it would seem that even if they are different and they might initially be addressing different issues, the domains are quite common, at least in some aspects. Also, there is a common use of concepts. AI and AI ethics, for example, use notions borrowed directly from neuroscience, intelligence, autonomy. And actually, we can say that for many, many years, neuroscientists described the brain as a computer. So in fact, it is interesting to see that there has been some type of, again, a commonality when it comes to fundamental terms or important terms. And finally, not only is it a question of overlapping domains and common use of concepts, there are also, they may raise common or similar concerns. For example, the issue of transparency and fairness that Michele was explaining before. This is certainly very important in AI ethics, but it is also important for neuroethics when we're talking about a number of emerging neurotechnologies and the lack of explicability of some of them. Or, for example, when we're thinking of humans being vulnerable in the case of AI, indeed, but it could be argued again that humans are also vulnerable to some extent when it comes to some emerging neurotechnologies. Or we can think of how, and this is a very common discussion with the AI ethics, to what extent AI might blur the lines between the human and the non-human. But the same can be said of certain neurotechnologies. So in fact, we do see overlapping domains, we see a common use of concepts, and we see that they may actually raise similar issues at the practical and at the more theoretical level. So let's go to the next. So the question then is, if it is true that they overlap and therefore their collaboration, their interaction is to be recommended, the question then of course becomes how? How can they collaborate? And what we have thought, and this is something that we have developed in a paper that is under review right now, is that the best way to actually try to determine how the collaboration can take place is to identify some areas in each of the disciplines that could benefit from the insights of the other discipline. So to this extent, for example, the papers that we have been mentioning so far that call for collaboration, they tend to say neuroethics can help AI ethics. Now, what we want to do here today is say, yes, in these two areas, for example, neuroethics can help AI ethics, but in these two other areas, AI ethics can help neuroethics. So really see how they can help each other. It's not just a question of neuroethics helping AI ethics, but rather the two different disciplines benefiting each other and how. So what we do next is identify some areas for growth in each of the disciplines to see how the other can help. And then we finish by focusing on one area where they can both work together. So let's move on to the next slide. And in the next slide, what we have here is the two areas where we think AI ethics can benefit from neuroethics. So these are two, let's say, problem areas for AI ethics. One is the whole issue that Michele already mentioned regarding the lack of conceptual clarity when it comes to some of the issues that AI ethics addresses and how it addresses it. And the second is the issue of cultural diversity and differences. So let's move on to the next, so we explain it a little bit further. I'm going to go fast in this respect because Michele explained some of the problems. But as I said, as Michele said before, the fact is that AI ethics certainly is a very rich discipline, but some AI ethics debates and some AI ethics guidelines and regulatory documents are often conceptually vague. Again, I'm not saying anything new here. Michele already explained this. Now, they're vague in two senses, though. They're vague regarding the challenges that they address. For example, a few months ago, there was this pretty intense discussion regarding the possibility of conscious AI. Probably some of you followed it. So the idea that there were some companies that were actually working on producing conscious AI. But the fact is that whether this is a problem depends on how we understand consciousness. Are we understanding consciousness from a biological perspective? Well, then we shouldn't worry because that's not going to happen. Are we understanding consciousness from a functionalist approach? Well, then probably worrying about conscious AI is a little bit premature. The bottom line is that the challenges that AI ethics addresses appear to be shaped by understandings. If we do not know what those understandings are, the discussion is going to be insufficient. Not only is there a problem of lack of clarity when it comes to challenges, the lack of clarity also comes up when it comes to how the challenges are approached. For example, in AI ethics, it seems that there is absolute agreement in that AI should benefit human beings. And we are all on board with this. I mean, obviously, all of us want AI to benefit human beings. However, the problem is that the notion benefit is kind of obscure. What does benefit mean? Does benefit mean well-being? So is AI supposed to enhance the well-being of human beings, or is AI supposed to make human beings flourish? Or is benefit equivalent to sustainability? Bottom line, it seems that we're going to be talking about benefit, which we should also be clear as to what we mean by benefit exactly. Because if benefit means flourishing, that may lead us in a different direction than if we just mean well-being, promote well-being or something like that. So let's go to the next slide. Why this focus on concepts and understandings? Well, because concepts matter. Concepts play a role in the discussion as to whether something is right or wrong. They play a role in how we understand things. It play a role regarding the social implications of some of these technologies and some of these deployments of AI. So concepts matter. And not only that, misleading conceptualizations are problematic because they negatively affect different publics. For example, they may have a negative impact on people's perception of science or emerging technologies. They may make people have a negative attitude towards some of the findings of science. And importantly, they might hinder trust. I mean, one of the things that science needs, and any actually development of a new technology needs, is public trust. But if people do not really understand, they may not trust that easily. So that is a problem. So how things are understood, what are the notions underlying some of the big social debates that we have today, normative and so on. That's important because it literally informs people's reactions. So let's move on to the next. So how can neuroethics help? Well, we cannot say, first of all, let's be transparent and humble here. We cannot say, oh, neuroethics is always conceptually clear. No, neuroethics is many times, often conceptually unclear. The difference, though, between neuroethics and AI ethics is that neuroethics, at least for the last few I would say 5 years, has been much more aware of this need to really be clear when it comes to concepts. And not only has it been aware, some neuroethicists and our group has played a role there, how some neuroethicists have created conceptual methodologies that are intended, that target unclear terms, and this methodology is used in such instrumentally to enhance, to enrich the normative analysis. So it's not that neuroethics is by definition more clear, but neuroethics has been much more eager and proactive in trying to develop methodologies that target unclarities. And I think that we think that that is really important. So this is important because we think that what AI ethics can do is take a look at these resources within neuroethics and use them. Why reinvent the wheel? If there is a discipline, another ethics that is already using these methodologies, we think that AI ethics will benefit from just using it, taking it, using what is good and leaving what is not that good, but at least paying attention to the insights from neuroethics in this respect. Now let's go though to the next problem, let's say, or problem issue that we see in AI ethics: cultural diversity or cultural differences. And we can say that when it comes to cultural, there are three facts. One, AI can have a significant impact on culture at the local, international, and global levels. Yes, no controversy there. Second, AI itself is shaped by culture, values, and norms. Yes. Third, practical measures designed to ensure that AI deployment is ethical work towards international consensus. That is, the guidelines that Michele mentioned before, and there are more by now, the latest count, at least for what I know, is 160 guidelines and regulations. So we're not talking about a couple. Most of them tend to seek universal agreement or some kind of international consensus when it comes to ethical AI. So if we look at these three facts, the first has received some attention, the second has received some attention, the third, though, seems to raise a number of issues. And the issues raised has to do with the fact that we are seeking international consensus, but AI, as we know, as number 1 and 2 state, impacts different cultures in different ways. We're talking about different, not only cultures when it comes to values, but also economic context, social context, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean? How do we even get to to international consensus? So let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next now. Let's skip this one because, yes. So how can neuroethics help if the problem is culture and diversity and recognition? Again, neuroethics has not always been that successful recognizing culture. This is still an ongoing topic within neuroethics, but again, neuroethics has been much more aware. In fact, neuroethics is a relatively new discipline, as is AI ethics, but neuroethics specifically, we're talking about 20 years, right? And even in 2005, there is already an article by Judy Illes and colleagues talking about international neuroethics. So there was already awareness that there is some kind of cultural international component that needs to be paid attention to. But in any case, how to address cultural diversity is still a problem for neuroethics, but neuroethics has been much more aware from the beginning. It has been more eager to recognize its cultural origins, and that has led to the second, what is neuroethics doing? It has led neuroethics to systematically question theoretical and methodological assumptions that underlie their approaches to inclusion. In particular, a couple of neuroethicists, specifically Karen Rommelfanger and Lawrence Becker-Sullivan, are working on a new understanding of cross-cultural. understanding cross-culturality in a way that doesn't make cultures homogeneous, but rather is able to look at commonalities while highlighting the differences. And we think that, again, this is a methodological approach to difference, to cultural difference, but we think that AI ethics can use those resources again, insofar as neuroethics is a field that is much more committed, apparently at least, to addressing methodologically some of the issues raised by diversity. AI ethics should look at those insights and take them, accept them, use them. So let's now move on to the other side of the coin, which is, okay, if neuroethics can be helpful to AI ethics by providing resources to address a culture and providing resources to undertake a better conceptual analysis, how can AI ethics help neuroethics? What are the flaws of neuroethics? And we believe that there are two main, not the only ones, probably there might be many others, but there are two main salient issues that neuroethics has not been that good at addressing. One is engagement with the private sector, and the second is anticipation and governance. So let's go to the first, private sector, in the next slide. So it is interesting because we know that neuroscience is highly promising for economic growth. And we all know that the private sector plays a huge role in translating, scaling neuroscientific findings. However, neuroethicists have rarely truly engaged with the private sector. Most of the neuroethics discussions take place at the academic level, sometimes at the policy-making level, but mostly at the academic level. There is not a lot of effort, at least until the last 2 years. There has not been specific efforts to engage with the public sector, to know what the neurotech industry is doing from an ethics perspective, to try to see whether there could be a helpful interaction or anything like that. So this is a problem. This is a problem where actually, again, probably AI ethics can help. So let's move on to the next slide. The fact is that the private sector has played a very big role in AI ethics. The private sector has participated and shaped the debate on the ethical issues raised by AI from the beginning, to the extent, actually, that some people say that the private sector is too involved in the AI ethics debate. And not that that is a problem, but the concern is that because the private sector is too involved, sometimes ethics takes a secondary place after economic considerations. But the bottom line is that within AI, we see a very actively involved private sector. This is not to say that that is not problematic. I'm not saying, and it has been great. No, I mean, there are a lot of problems, but at least we see an engagement between AI ethics and the private sector that we don't see in neuroethics, as I said before. What is AI ethics learning from this engagement with the public sector? Well, that there are structural considerations that need to be taken into account. It also is what AI ethics is learning the hard way, probably, is the negative impact of what is known as ethics washing. That is, ethics washing is to say that, hey, I have ethics, just to avoid, let's say, hard regulation or anything like that. So, of course, again, AI ethics is learning quite a bit from this engagement of the public sector. But precisely because AI ethics is learning so much, and this learning has to do with the relation between AI ethics and the private sector, this is something that neuroethics could use. Neuroethics could look at what AI ethics is doing, could look at the type of engagements with the industry, could choose which engagement is good, which engagement is not so good, could look at the problems raised, the issue, as I said, ethics washing, ethics lobbying, and there are a whole number of ethics problematic things. And this would be an insight that for neuroethics from AI ethics. So we think that that would be useful for them to interact at that level. Let's move on to the next, and I don't want to take tons of time. So, okay, anticipation and governance. This is another interesting one because if there is a discipline that is intended to be anticipatory, it's neuroethics. It is supposed to be anticipatory. Good neuroethics has to anticipate. However, neuroethics, I think, finds itself in an interesting position because it has been accused of doing the wrong type of anticipation. And the accusation comes from, or it is accused of doing two extreme things, and these are opposite extremes. On one hand, we have a lot of social scientists who accuse neuroethics of being too extreme, of promoting hype, on focusing on unrealistic scenarios, on speculations, on things that cannot happen. So this is a criticism to neuroethics coming from the social sciences many times. So they say, well, that's why many social scientists do not like neuroethics. They believe that neuroethics is just a make-believe, very speculative thought experiment discipline that doesn't really make a lot of sense from a practical standpoint. So on one hand, we have this criticism to neuroethics. But then, interestingly enough, there are others that accuse neuroethics of doing the opposite, of not being concerned enough. And for example, we can think of something that right now is very much in vogue, which is the discussion over neural rights. The whole discussion over neural rights, whether there should be neural rights and so on, comes from a group of people led by Raphael Schuster, who believe that neuroethics is not aware enough and proactive enough when it comes to the awful things that might come our way. So it's kind of interesting that neuroethics in any way is being accused of not doing the right kind of anticipation, either too much or too little, but not the right type. And this actually could even affect governance. I said before that right now there are, last count, approximately 160 documents, guidelines, regulations on AI. We are lucky if we find probably, I don't know, 20 on neuroethics. We have some basic ones, some recommendations, OECD and so on, but we don't have the proliferation of guidelines and regulations in neuroethics that we have in AI ethics. I am not saying, though, that it is good to have 160, though. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying, yes, there should be 200, 160, even 100, even probably 30 is too much. But this shows that within AI ethics, there has been more awareness of the need to produce some type of document. And we don't see the same awareness within neuroethics. So let's move on to the next. How can AI ethics help then neuroethics with anticipation? Well, again, AI ethics anticipatory practices have the type of anticipation within AI ethics has led the field to address governance and regulation, and not only that, to address the practical difficulties in implementing guidelines and regulations. Not that the issue has been solved, but there are tons of people doing research on this, trying to see how to do it. So that could be useful to neuroethics, to see the experiences of AI ethics, to see what works, to see what doesn't, and take it. AI ethics right now is learning the challenges of implementation, the challenges of translation. Those challenges that AI ethics is learning, that could be useful to neuroethics. Neuroethics could look at those challenges. So again, as I said, why to reinvent the wheel when somebody is already dealing with some problems? Those could be problems that neuroethics should know, should be aware of. And also, neuroethics then can use experiences of AI ethics when it comes to challenges in translation, when it comes to how to meaningfully interact and how to meaningfully integrate ethical recommendations. So so far, I have explained two areas in each discipline where the insights of the other can help. Now let's very briefly finish with an area where they can work together. Not one taking the insights of the other, but rather working together. And I think that engagement is such area, engagement. So let's move on to the next slide. Engagement. Lately, there has been a lot of talk on engagement, more so than probably 10 years ago. And the question is, of course, why? Why engagement with different publics? What is the advantage of engagement? Now, we could say first, engagement is important to respect the rights of citizens to, first of all, know what's going on, particularly when it comes to the development and deployment of the products of science. And also the rights of citizens to participate in decision-making processes. After all, whatever we do today will shape society tomorrow. So it seems that if people are going to be affected and shaped by developments in science, well, they should also participate in decision-making. So that's one possible justification for engagement. It is also said that engagement is good because it enhances, it enriches the knowledge of people of how science and technology will impact society. It improves science, many people have said, and it is important because it allows science to align its values with the values, needs, priorities of society. And also, and this is Michele Jasanoff, a very well-known social scientist, talks about technologies of humility and says, you know, because of how much human beings can do lately, they have a tendency to come to or to present technologies of hubris. It's like, this is what we do when we take over. And she says it's time to be more humble, to talk about technologies of humility, precisely because we do not know what these technologies can do in the future. And for her, technologies of humility, or having this attitude of looking at technology in a humble way, entails, again, engaging with others. Because, in fact, others can give us information that is needed in order to truly, genuinely enhance science and technology. So let's move on to the next slide. That engagement is important is clear if we look at some very key documents, for example, the OECD recommendations in responsible research and innovation in neurotechnology. They specifically says robust public engagement, responsible innovation must enable societal deliberation on neurotechnology. The Council of Europe report on human rights and technologies in biomedicine, they say, in order to guarantee that the directions of innovation and the ethical challenges raised by technological developments are robustly deliberated, governance should go hand in hand with broad and informed public dialogue. Let's look at the report of UNESCO. Engagement must be made inclusive by embracing public values in the innovation and development process. I mean, these are the really important documents, and they both are talking about engagement, a very rich engagement. So let's move on to the next. The problem is that in practice, engagement is not any of that. Engagement is not necessarily truly engaging with publics and trying to, no. Most of the time, engagement is either a promotion of the products of science and of science, telling people, dissemination of information, sometimes engagement, sometimes, but that's why the question mark, sometimes is a way to try to find out what publics think, but only sometimes. Sometimes, hopefully, it's a way to promote trust, but in any case, it's always via information and communication, not necessarily a two-way street. And in addition to that, particularly in AI, there is a tendency, engagement in AI, there is a tendency to conceptualize publics in a problematic way. What do I mean by this? It has been argued that engagement efforts within AI tend to engage with the public in a very paternalistic way, telling the public how lucky they are because of how they're going to benefit by these developments. So it's kind of a paternalistic understanding of publics instead of a more equal, we help each other approach. So let's move on to the next slide. A rich conception of engagement is not that. The conception of engagement as information is known as the deficit notion of engagement. Engagement is just telling others what is being done. That's a deficit model. Today, there is the goal is to go beyond the deficit model and to see engagement as inclusive, as proactive, and as bidirectional. Inclusive, it includes everybody. Proactive, it is not just a reaction to something that happens. Again, it's anticipatory. And bidirectional in the sense that it's not the scientific community telling the publics, is publics and scientific community in a conversation where they both affect each other. So let's move on to the next. Lately, there has been a number of neuroethicists within the International Brain Initiative in particular that have been trying to bring this very richer notion of engagement to neuroethics and see neuroethics engagement as a generative activity that combines conceptual approaches, empirical approaches, normative resources to advance mutual learning, again, not inform, not communicate, advance mutual learning, promote multidirectional communication, include different points of view, and so on. This is a paper, by the way, under review. So we go to the next. What we would like to propose is that, in fact, considering this goal to go beyond the deficit model of engagement and considering the topics raised by the convergence of AI, big data analytics, and neuroscience, it is important to be particularly aware of the risk of engaging with the public as a way of showing hubris rather than humility. So neuroethics and AI ethics have a unique opportunity, considering how the different disciplines, neuroscience and AI, interact and what they produce. Neuroethics and AI ethics have a very unique opportunity to engage with publics in a way that these technologies that result from these advances are not seen as an exercise in hubris, but rather they are seen as an exercise in humility. The bottom line is that considering how neuroscience and AI are interacting, it is important to understand the ethical issues. And understanding the ethical issues means identifying them, framing them, assessing them. Such identification, framing, assessment requires rich multidirectional engagement. So AI ethics and neuroethics can actually strengthen this kind of engagement in theory and implement it in practice. Michele, I give you back, the floor is back with you.
Thank you very much, Arleen. Okay, so now we say a few words about a case study, which is brain-inspired AI. First, a premise. What I now describe you is the result of a collaborative effort we have been doing within the HPP, specifically within work package 3. We have an embedded ethical and philosophical task in this work package, and together with around 10 people, including also researchers in robotic and artificial intelligence, we have been studying the philosophical and ethical issues arising from brain-inspired AI. So first, what is brain-inspired AI? Brain-inspired AI is a specific case of biological inspired AI, and we can have a couple of definitions of biological inspired AI. First is a more general definition, and according to this definition, biological inspired AI is refer to the compatibility of AI with current knowledge in biology, particularly in neurobiology. But as you can see, this is a rather broad and general and vague definition. So we can have also a more specific definition, but here it is, sorry. So the more specific definition of biological inspired AI is an AI system whose architecture and functioning include biological constraints that make specific parts of the system biologically realistic. So this is a more technical definition of a biological inspired AI, which is an AI including biological constraints. So basically, the concept is that AI assumes biology and specifically the brain as a model, so as inspiration for its working in order to optimize its functioning. Importantly, a biologically inspired AI, including brain-inspired AI, does not necessarily fully emulate or replicate the reference biological system, like the brain, because we can have different levels of biological realism, in the sense that an AI system can emulate one specific level of the biological system, say the brain, taken as a model, not necessarily all the biological system. And more specifically, the brain-inspired AI, as I already mentioned, takes the brain as a model. In the case of the brain, of course, there is no such thing as the brain, as kind of general, absolute model, because brains vary substantially between both species and individuals of the same species. So we have different variations between the brains of the individuals part of the species. And also within the same brain, we have different organizational levels and regions that, of course, have different properties. So this is to say that the brain inspiration needs to be contextualized and specified. We should specify which level of the brain we refer to in our brain-inspired system. For instance, biological realism can be achieved emulating a particular biological mechanism, like the spike time-independent plasticity learning rule observed in biological synapses, or by using a biological constraint model, like the Hodgkin-Huxley model of neuronal action potentials. In both cases, we eventually have a brain-inspired AI, but you see that the meaning, the specific meaning, is rather different in the two cases. In the paper that we are working on together with different people from Work Package 3, we introduced the distinction between two main kinds of ethical issues raised by brain-inspired AI. Practical ethical issues and more fundamental or foundational ethical issues. With practical ethical issues, we mean the ethical issues related to the impact of AI on society at different levels. In general, practical issues can be raised by a technology, including AI, in two main ways. They can be intrinsic to the technology itself, more specifically related to how technology works, or extrinsic, emerging from the use of the technology in question and the resulting relationship with the users. In the paper we are working on about brain-inspired AI, we identify four main categories related to brain-inspired AI that raise the specific practical ethical issues. So we have an operational level, and this level relates to how AI works, how it operates. We have an instrumental level, so it relates to how people use AI, so AI as an instrument. A relational level related to how people see AI, and also the resulting psychological and metaphysical human-AI relationships, which basically means the impact that AI has on the self-understanding of humans. And then the societal level, related to the social and economic costs and consequences of the development and use of AI. So, to summarize, we think that at the practical level, these are the four main categories of issues raised by brain-inspired AI. And we provide an analysis in relation to these four different levels or categories. So just to illustrate, at the operational level, we can have as potential positive effects a more efficient and environment-friendly systems, because brain-inspired AI requires less energy power than more traditional AI. Importantly, when I refer to ethical issues, I refer to both positive or negative possible consequences of the brain-inspired AI, because the ethical reflection is not only concerned about possible negative impact, but also about possible positive impact. So ethics is not just to say no, but it's also to promote the benefit for society. And so it highlights the possible positive effects. So among the potential negative effects at the operational level of brain-inspired AI, we have the risk of an increased susceptibility to human biases. And this can be realized for different reasons, including the selection of background brain data, and also the risk to replicate the human brain biases in AI systems, because our brain function relying on a number of biases, cognitive biases, for instance. And so we can risk to replicate these biases also in the brain-inspired system. We also have the risk of insufficient recognition and flow communication about the limited capacity of brain-inspired AI to emulate the brain. Here the problem is that the brain is a very complicated system. It has so many different function levels, and the brain also is a plastic organ. So you have a dynamic system, stochastic, characterized by an high rate of changes. And so it's very complicated, a very complex effort to really emulate the brain. And this limitation, which is not only in practice, but also in principle of brain-inspired AI, should be taken into account. Otherwise, we risk to not sufficiently recognize the limit of the technology. Another risk is the limited possibility for humans to optimize brain-inspired AI, because brain-inspired AI is intrinsically selective. We cannot include all brain data. We need to be selective, as I explained at the beginning. We need to contextualize the brain-inspired AI to specify the brain level we refer to. And also, there is a risk of excluding a priori factors that are crucial for achieving the desired goals. If I want, for instance, brain-inspired AI in order to optimize the, say, just to give you a very simple example, to optimize face recognition, but I exclude relevant brain functions since the beginning, then in the end, I cannot really have a very efficient brain-inspired system able to recognize faces. So the point is that data selection, which is necessary in brain-inspired AI, can of course bias the final result. And so we need to be aware of this, otherwise we also risk to do bad ethical choices. At the instrumental level, among the possible positive effects, we can have broader domains of application than traditional AI. This is one of the most debated issue around AI in general, the fact that it is limited in its application. So it is how the literature defines it, narrow AI. Brain-inspired AI is a possible strategy to inform actual AI with more biological data and to make it more flexible and so usable in a number of contexts and domains. And so this would be a possible positive effect of brain-inspired AI at the instrumental level. Among the possible negative effects, we have the risk of new kinds of brain-based crimes, for instance, because brain-inspired AI might help in understanding brain features, and these brain features might be exploited for negative applications. And so we can have new kinds of crime in the end. So this will be a negative effect at the instrumental level, so on how AI, brain-inspired AI, is eventually used. At the relational level, which refers to both how humans use AI and also the possible impact of how humans self-understand, so to say, understand themselves. Among the positive effect, the potential positive effect, we have the possibility to inspire more positive attitudes towards AI, because users' awareness of the brain-inspired nature of AI system they use may raise more empathetic feelings. So here the point is that we still have in our society kind of technophobic attitudes towards not only AI, technology in general. Now, if brain-inspired AI is perceived as more similar to humans, this might inspire a more empathetic, so to say, feeling, and so more positive attitudes towards AI. So this will be, in the end, a positive effect of brain-inspired AI at the relational level. But on the other side, we can have a number of possible negative effects, including the risk of high perception and misplaced trust in brain-inspired AI, because we risk to employ a number of anthropomorphic attitudes, and because of the background view of the brain as a paradigm of efficiency combined to inadequate recognition and communication about the limited capacity of brain-inspired AI to emulate the brain. So here we touch another hot topic concerning the ethical discussion on AI, the fact that often we perceive an AI system as literally able of anything, and so kind of paradigmatic efficiency. And if we combine this risk with the attitude to project ourselves in the world around us, and this is the meaning of anthropomorphic attitudes, and we do not recognize the intrinsic limitation I referred to earlier, the intrinsic limitation of brain-inspired AI, then in the end, we have very high perception of this technology, which is not realistic. If not realistic, then the ethical choices will be misplaced and not really balanced. Another possible negative effect at the relational level is the bewildering impact on ingrained belief about human identity. If we traditionally see ourselves as unique, or anyway as the most perfect, so to say, beings in the world, a brain-inspired AI might be perceived as really kind of final challenge to this belief that we have about ourselves. And so this should be considered and analyzed, because it can have different kind of consequences of how we see ourselves and the technology. Then, at the end, the last level I mentioned is the societal level. At this level, as possible positive effect, we have the possibility of new, cheaper, and more democratic products, because brain-inspired AI needs less energy, which means it's less expensive. And so on theory, it can be more widespread in the world. But on the other hand, we have the risk of increased concentration of power in a few hands, because on one hand, it's true that brain-inspired AI needs less energy, so it's cheaper, potentially cheaper, but on the other hand, it requires very advanced and cutting-edge knowledge. Brain-inspired AI, I didn't say that, but brain-inspired AI, of course, relies on very advanced knowledge in both neuroscience and AI. So it's something not that easy to be developed. And this, of course, connects to we might say kind of epistemic injustice or limitation that still exists in the world. So this is another big problem to take into account. Okay, so this was an illustration of what I described as practical ethical issues raised by AI, but we have also fundamental ethical issues. We identify a number of these issues in the paper we are working on. Fundamental because they refer to foundational moral and ethical notions that play a key role in our ethical reasoning. Within these fundamental ethical issues, we identify two main kinds, so to say, those related to goals, and these issues refer to questions like, what is the driver of brain-inspired AI? So what do we want to achieve by it? So what do we want to achieve using brain-inspired AI? And the other main group of foundational ethical issues are those related to concepts, which include issues like epistemic risk, implicit assumption about brain-inspired AI, and considerations about the historical, cultural, and societal context of brain-inspired AI. So let's see an illustration of both these groups in relation to a number of possible issues raised. So first, concerning the goal of brain-inspired AI, among the goal of this new form of AI, we have improving traditional AI, making AI more autonomous, discovering operational principles in different sensory motor and cognitive fields, which might be scaled and applied to AI system, and taking the brain as a model for advancing in the direction of artificial general intelligence, which is the opposite of the narrow form of AI we still have today. So the first goal, which is improving traditional AI, raised a number of fundamental ethical issues, including what is the assumed meaning of improvement. So what do we mean by improving traditional AI? More specifically, does the concept of improvement we have in mind include also awareness of potential social impact? Or the improvement we refer to is just a technical notion, it's just an operational in the sense of how AI works, so from a simple technical point of view. Concerning the second goal of brain-inspired AI, making AI more autonomous, so the question that arises is how might more autonomous AI system impact human autonomy, including how people think about their autonomy? Because here we have the risk of two autonomies interacting with each other. The autonomy of the humans, which is a pillar, we might say, of human rights, and on the other hand, the autonomy of AI system that we would like to improve and to make more, more developed than the traditional AI. Another possible goal I refer to is discovering operational principles of the brain and to apply these operational principles to AI system. And the questions arising include, does brain-inspired AI aim to replicate operational brain principles related to ethical reasoning, for instance? We have already identified a number of brain features, including structures and functions, that are relevant for ethical reasoning. So, do we want to translate also these brain features in AI systems? And can, in this way, we introduce artificial moral agents, or is this concern a bit more too premature or unrealistic? So is it realistic to think about the possibility of having artificial moral agents if we replicate artificially the brain features that are necessary for our brain, for our ethical reasoning? Finally, another possible goal of brain-inspired AI is to take the brain as a model for artificial general intelligence. And the question, one of the possible questions that can be raised is, does the underlying concept of artificial general intelligence include also ethically relevant features? So, what do we mean by general intelligence? Does this generality refer to also include ethically relevant features, or ethics has nothing to do with the general intelligence we aim to realize artificially? Okay, so this was about the goal. The other main kind of fundamental or foundational issues is about concepts. So a first main point, a fundamental question to raise is, why to take biological brain as a model of AI? Is this something that we can take for granted? I mean, the fact that the brain, the biological brain, is the best possible model to develop and to enhance actual artificial intelligence? We have a number of potential fundamental ethical questions, like how can we be sure that translating the brain principles in AI is the best possible option for advancing in the development of AI and then maximizing the benefit for our society? Are we maybe just seconding our anthropocentric bias, which makes it hard, if not impossible, for us to think beyond the form of intelligence as we know it in nature? The point is that we are epistemically limited. Our possibility to know is limited and biased by who we are. And the human intelligence is the only kind of intelligence we know. So maybe assuming the brain, the human brain specifically, as the model for optimizing AI is just a further illustration of these biases, the fact that we are unable to think differently. So the risk is that we can eventually end up replicating the shortcomings that make biological and particularly human intelligence a source of risk and dangers for human society and the rest of the world, because human intelligence is very efficient in a number of contexts, but it is also the source of dangers for ourselves and the rest of the world. So we should take into account this risk that replicating human intelligence, we replicate not only its efficiency, but also the risk that it raises in a number of contexts. Another fundamental question that arises in relation to brain-inspired AI is, what are the implications of brain-inspired AI on those concepts that are traditionally assumed as the basis for qualifying an agent as moral? For instance, if what characterizes and qualifies our biological intelligence can be realistically replicated artificially, would it imply that there is nothing unique in our identity? I already mentioned this possible question, but now I am referring to this topic from a fundamental point of view. The point here is that maybe we need to enlarge, so to say, the scope of moral agents. And so this would be a challenge to our supposed uniqueness as moral subjects. This can have an impact on our self-understanding of as moral agent. Also, if what characterizes us as moral agents can be artificially replicated to a brain per AI, so would this brain per AI be a moral agent? Is a new moral subject? This is something that maybe it's premature, but should be also anticipated as a possible problem. And finally, would an hypothetical artificial replication of our moral agency have consequences on the way to discriminate between what is good and what is bad? So can a brain inspire new form of moral agency impact on how we distinguish between what is good and what is bad? These are just some illustrations of fundamental ethical issues that, again, together with practical ethical issues, we think provide a quite broad picture of possible ethical issues arising from brain-inspired AI. But for now, I thank you also on behalf of Arleen. So thanks to you all.